In London in 1314, playing football could end with a threat of imprisonment. Not because the ball was cursed and not because kicking it offended God. The complaint was practical. People were striking large footballs through the city, creating noise, disorder, and fear that worse trouble would follow. That is a remarkable amount of government attention for a ball. It also gives us the real question: how does a cheap object become a public problem? Start before the officials arrive. One person has a ball and nothing dramatic happens. Then another person joins. Then another. The rules are local, the boundaries are understood only by the players, and everyone is completely certain that their version is correct. Now the game begins to grow. Medieval football was not modern soccer. There was no standardized field, no universal rulebook, no referee, and no neat separation between the game and the world around it. Hands might be used, feet might be used, sticks might appear. A wall, a gate, a road, or some local landmark could become part of the field. That flexibility made the game easy to start. It also made it hard to contain, because the available space was rarely empty. A medieval street already carried pedestrians, animals, carts, goods, work, deliveries, and people trying to reach somewhere else. Put one player there, and the street continues. Add 20, and the street starts belonging to the game. Now there are bodies, noise, movement, spectators, passers-by, collisions, and disputes over rules nobody bothered writing down. A private amusement has become a public event, and public events have a habit of becoming someone else's problem. That is the world behind the London Proclamation of 1314. The authorities were not writing a philosophy of sport. They were responding to disruption because the game had begun interfering with everything around it. So football was prohibited inside the city under threat of imprisonment. The ball had crossed an invisible line. A moment earlier, it created entertainment. Now it blocked movement, attracted complaints, and brought government into the street. Nothing about the ball itself had changed. The consequences around it had. That is where the easiest explanation appears. Medieval authorities hated fun. It is a satisfying answer, but it is also wrong. Medieval people played games, gambled, drank, watched contests, made music, and gathered whenever opportunity allowed. Dice, gaming pieces, chessmen, and boards survived the people who used them. The problem was not pleasure. The problem was what happened when pleasure became large, noisy, dangerous, or difficult to control. And football was unusually good at becoming all four. A ball required very little. No stadium, no matching shirts, no expensive equipment, definitely no television contract. You needed a ball, a few willing players, and enough confidence to begin. That low barrier made the game popular. Popularity changed the scale. Scale changed the risk. And risk created records. Later medieval sources connect football and other rough ball games with injuries, fights, broken bones, and sometimes deaths. That does not mean every game became a street battle. Most peaceful games left almost nothing behind. A calm afternoon ended and the evidence disappeared with it. A broken bone created a complaint. A death created an inquiry. A ban created paperwork. So the historical record naturally makes disorder easier to see than ordinary enjoyment. But the bans reveal something else. They did not make the game disappear. A law tells us what an authority wanted. It does not tell us that everyone obeyed. If officials return to the same activity again and again, the safest conclusion is not that the first prohibition worked perfectly. Sometimes repeated prohibition is evidence that people kept doing the thing. Medieval government, it turns out, also knew the experience of saying, "We already told you not to do that." But now the story changes. If authorities disliked football, did they simply want people to play less? Not always. Sometimes they wanted people to play differently. This is where the bow enters the story. English rulers had a practical reason to care whether men could use one. Military effectiveness depended heavily on trained archers, and a war bow was not something a person picked up for the first time on Tuesday and mastered before battle on Wednesday. It required strength, technique, and years of repetition. That turned recreation into a political question. Spend an hour chasing a ball, and you are playing. Spend the same hour practicing archery, and you are also playing in a sense. But now the activity produces a skill the crown can use. The same hour has changed meaning. In 1363, Edward III ordered able-bodied men to practice with bows and arrows on holidays. The same declaration told officials to suppress football and other idle games. That was not a general attack on amusement. It was a choice between amusements. The crown was not saying, do nothing. It was saying, do this instead. And that creates a much more revealing conflict. The ball offered immediate competition, while the bow demanded discipline. The ball could appear almost anywhere. The bow needed equipment, space, and practice. The ball created a local game. The bow created a military skill. One form of recreation rose from the players themselves. The other gained approval because authority could use the result. 25 years later, the law became even more specific. Legislation again targeted servants and laborers, directing them away from football and toward archery. Now the question was no longer only whether a London street had become chaotic. The government was making a claim on particular people and on the way they used time outside ordinary labor. That is the midpoint. This is not a story about medieval boredom. It is a story about selection. Which games would be tolerated? Which would be restricted? Which would be encouraged because they produced something useful? And who had the power to decide? The ball and the bow make that system visible. The ball was cheap, spontaneous, local, and difficult to control. The bow was demanding, structured, and valuable to the state. One could block a street, the other could strengthen an army. To a player, both might feel like competition. To a passerby, the ball might feel like an obstacle. To a city official, it might look like disorder. To the crown, it could look like time being wasted on the wrong skill. The activity had not changed. The observer had. But the law creates another problem. Writing an order is easy. Changing what people actually do is harder. A statute does not prove that every servant obeyed, that every official enforced it, or that every village abandoned its games for archery practice. The repeated instructions show ambition. They also show resistance. If the policy had worked completely, there would have been less reason to issue it again. That makes the surviving rules more interesting. They are not proof that medieval life was tightly controlled. They are proof that authorities kept trying to control something popular enough to resist them, and the ball had one advantage no law could remove. It was immediate. You did not need a formal field, years of training, or any concern for whether England might need archers later. You only needed enough room to begin. That simplicity explains why the game kept returning. It also explains why officials kept noticing it. Players gathered. The game expanded. The street narrowed. Passers-by complained. Someone was injured. An authority reacted. The law arrived after the game had already become impossible to ignore. That is important. The proclamation was not the beginning of the story. It was evidence that the story was already happening. And once you see that, the old band stops looking like a ridiculous medieval curiosity. It becomes evidence of a contest over public space, popular behavior, and useful recreation. The city wanted order. The crown wanted archers. The players wanted a game. Those goals did not fit together neatly. That tension is why the same activity can look harmless in one moment and threatening in the next. A ball on the ground is just an object. A ball in motion gathers people. A crowd changes the street. A blocked street changes the meaning of the game. Then government changes the meaning again. The same process happens with the bow. A piece of equipment becomes a pastime. The pastime becomes practice. The practice becomes military value. And military value attracts official support. So medieval authorities were not simply deciding whether people could have fun, they were deciding which consequences of fun they were willing to accept. Some amusement stayed private, some spilled into public space, some produced injuries, some produced skills, some could be ignored, some became useful, and some remained popular enough to be prohibited more than once. That brings us back to the two objects, the ball and the bow. At first, both look like equipment for an afternoon activity, but medieval policy gives them opposite political meanings. The ball represents play that appears from below, cheap, local, spontaneous, and difficult to contain. The bow represents play that authority can redirect toward the needs of the kingdom. One asks who gets to occupy the street. The other asks what recreation should produce. And between them stands the medieval player, probably less interested in political theory than in winning. The final irony is that authorities left us the clearest evidence of the game they wanted people to stop. A peaceful match could end and vanish. A prohibited match created paperwork. The ball survived in the record not because everyone approved of it. It survived because officials could not make people put it down. So if you had one free medieval afternoon, Be honest. Would you choose the bow the kingdom wanted, or the ball everyone kept banning?